let's start. The State of the Union. It was it was long. I think probably halfway, only people who continue to watch until the end, probably, people who are doing programs like me. I almost fall asleep several times, seriously.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
anyway, let's start with the foreign policy. It's pretty thin in terms of foreign policy. Do you
yeah.
agree?
Absolutely. I was expecting an awful lot more,
Hmm.
and I was expecting a lot more about China, to be
Oh,
honest,
oh yeah.
and about Russia hardly anything either, and Ukraine, but a ferocious passage about Iran, and I think this is probably at the top of Trump's mind at the moment, and we've got a lot to say about this because we haven't seen an attack on Iran yet. The latest word is that if it happens, it will be in mid-March. But of course, he's going to China at the end of March. So that doesn't leave much time.
Now, in terms of China, I couldn't believe that he didn't say anything about China. So I
No,
actually
no,
went back to the transcript
no, no.
to
I
search
know,
China, the
I know,
word. Not a single time was
no, no,
used. The
I know.
only time regarding China was he said the Maduro was guarded by Russian and Chinese military technology.
Yes,
It didn't go
yes,
very well, of course. So that seems like the only
yes,
time he talked
yes.
about
Yeah, I
China.
know, I know.
So what is the signal? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think partly he doesn't want to say things about China that are going to offend
Uh-huh.
China
Okay.
ahead of his visit,
Hmm.
and I think that probably does play a part here.
Hmm.
But I'm going to suggest something that there is another reason, which is that he's scared. I know that sounds strange, but think about it. I mean, he had that extraordinary economic war with China last year.
Yeah.
He was comprehensively defeated. He had to go to South Korea. He was, I mean, it was embarrassing to see him with Xi Jinping.
Hmm.
I think that he's very intimidated by China,
Hmm.
actually. And I think that just as things haven't really worked out between him and Putin, he's now even more scared of
Hmm.
China and of Xi
Hmm.
Jinping. And I suspect that probably one reason why he's really coming after Iran so heavily at the moment. He's got to be strong against someone.
Something. Uh-huh.
China's too strong. Russia's also
Uh-huh.
stronger than he thought. So it's going to be Iran instead.
Yeah, I guess with Russia, he thought he just say some nice words and then,
Mm,
okay, he thought it would be easy to
yeah.
get Putin on his side, but Putin is not so easily to to be pushed around and manipulated.
No,
So,
no, no.
um,
But again, I think that like so many people in the US, he grossly underestimates
uh,
China.
uh-huh,
I mean, he sees China, he still has this idea about China as being this country that basically became economically successful because it stole all this
uh-huh.
technology and all these jobs
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
US.
Mhm.
And that all that Trump needed to do was slam the door shut on all of that. And the Chinese would cave and capitulate to everything he wanted, and I think it was the biggest shock for Donald Trump personally in 2025 was the fact that he couldn't impose his will on China.
Hmm. Yeah. We will go back to that. Now, regarding Iran,
Mm.
one of I read that they were already everything's ready to go to attack Iran, but then they had some sewage problems on their USS Ford. It sounds really bad that now they're going to they were right now they it's in Greece or something to
Yes,
have
yes.
to let the soldiers to go on board to use the shower and the toilet. Is that really the reason or is it
I, I
that
think
bad?
I think it is part of the reason. I think this should not be underestimated. Actually,
Hmm.
there's been an extraordinary study by the CSIS, which is a think tank, a Washington think tank, the Center for Strategic whatever it is
Hmm.
studies. Anyway, it's the think tank basically of the military industrial complex,
Hmm.
and it said a number of things. Firstly, that the US military are not powerful enough to achieve anything, to achieve the kind of objectives that Donald Trump wants them to achieve in Iran. There are not enough warships. There's not enough aircraft. There's not enough missiles. Um, they could sustain a military campaign for 4 or 5 days, but not beyond that. That was what this report
Okay.
said.
Okay. 5 days.
But it also said something else, which is that out of a fleet of about 230 warships, only 50 are operational.
Oh.
20, 20 of those are now located in the Arabian Sea. So that's 40% of the entire deployable US Navy. And that all of the other parts of the Navy are in port, receiving maintenance. And one got the sense that the ships are becoming old, that there's been an awful lot of wear and tear, that the maintenance provided is not as good as it used to be, that things are not as functional as they once were. We get reports that there's missile shortages.
Mm-hmm.
They've used all their missiles up in Ukraine and fighting the Houthis and doing all of these kind of things. The overall sense I got was of a military that's very run down. It's still very powerful. I mean, we shouldn't say it's not powerful, but it's not quite as powerful as it used to be, say, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that this is something which is holding the Americans back. And of course, all over the media, there's been these reports that there was this meeting in the Oval Office on Sunday, and the generals and the intelligence people said to Trump, "Look, yes, we can attack Iran, but we can only do so for a short time, and it may not succeed."
The USS Ford was, I think, delivered to the US military in 2017, and it
Yeah.
wasn't full service until 2021 or something.
Yes.
So it's a fairly new aircraft carrier, but already have this kind of problem. Seems pretty bad in terms of their sewage problems.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like either it's overly used or something, or short of maintenance. It just seems like it's just not well maintained at all, it seems like.
No, it's not. It's not well maintained. And can I just say, I mean, that timeline already is very, very problematic. I mean, 2017, the first it enters service. There's more delays in getting the second carrier of this series in production. It is well known that there are many problems now in shipyards. In fact, there's only one. The US Navy is basically down to one big shipyard, which is the one that actually builds the carriers. Um, and apparently, the logistics and the maintenance are nowhere near as good as they ought to be. And the Ford itself has, I understand, been sailing around the seas for about 6 months now.
Yeah.
And that is a long time, apparently, for a carrier. I mean, again, it seems incredible that a warship only can be in operation for 6 months and has to return to port. But it seems that that is so. Now, I have to say, I think that these logistic problems are as important in
Mm-hmm.
demonstrating the decay
Yeah.
as everything else.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they cannot keep up with production, the fact that warships that they've tried to build frigates, they've just cancelled their last program to build frigates. The ship that preceded the frigates that they were going to build, which is the littoral class warships, have proved a disaster. That the destroyers that they're building are according to a design that was developed in the 1970s. So I mean, they clearly have industrial problems,
Mm-hmm.
and they are part of the whole
Mm-hmm.
industrial problems that we see throughout the military at the time. You remember last week we were talking about the fact that the F-35s are now being delivered without radars.
But regarding Iran, so on the one hand, he talked
Mm.
about this Midnight Hammer. Sounds like a very successful operation where supposedly they already taken out all the nuclear facilities in Iran. Then what's the justification for him to attack Iran now then? I don't, I mean, the message is very confusing.
Well, I mean, you're not the only person who found it confusing. They called in all the important. They called all the, was it seven important people from Congress to brief this, and several of them came out and said that they just couldn't understand what the point of this whole attack was. I mean, there was no actual reason or explanation for the attack was in fact given. If you go to Trump's words, if you read them through in the State of the Union address, I mean, the impression I get is that the reason he wants to attack Iran is because he hates Iran.
Yeah,
He says all sorts of things about Iran
yeah,
that are complete nonsense.
yeah.
That they killed 1 million people using
Mhm.
roadside bombs. What? I mean, things like that. That they 32,000 protesters were gunned down in the recent protests. What?
Yeah.
I mean, that they're planning to build an intercontinental ballistic missile that will strike at the territory of the United States. Hello? I mean, all of this. I mean, it's all over the place. I
Uh-huh.
mean, it's actually so weird.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And it's not just about Iran. I think a lot of things is
Yeah,
just over the
yeah,
place. It's the whole
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Um, Venezuela, they just had another strike, boat strike, right? They strike some boat like yesterday. But
yeah.
his State of Union, he said now Venezuela is the new friend and partner. You see, that's another confusing thing. What exactly is he saying here?
Well,
I don't get
what's
it.
new friend and partner. Of course, the Venezuelan government itself is pushing back
Hmm.
against all of this to the extent that it can.
Hmm.
But I mean, he's touting this as some great success,
Yeah. Hmm.
which up to now, well, I mean, they've been able to steal some of Venezuela's oil because
Uh-huh.
they
Yeah.
have, but that's all.
Yeah. Yeah. The remarkable thing about Venezuela is that from the beginning, he made it very clear it's about oil. So he just
Yes,
said, we need to own those oil,
yes,
right? So
yes.
that, that's kind of interesting. Russia and Ukraine, he didn't talk much, right? He only said that they are 25,000 people die per month. I find that's number is kind of interesting, but nonetheless, he didn't say what the solution is, where it's heading, nothing, right?
Nothing at all. And the 25,000 a month is very, very interesting because it is far below what the British and the Ukrainians are saying, just to say. And it doesn't make it clear who exactly is losing
Mhm.
these
Yeah,
25,000 people a
yeah.
month. So, I mean, it has this big question mark over that. My own sense is that Trump is losing interest in Ukraine.
Uh-huh.
He hasn't been talking about it very much. The Americans abstained at the General Assembly, the resolution
Mhm.
that's always criticized Russia, that always comes up this time of year. China also abstained, by the way.
Yeah.
So this is one instance when China and the
Yeah.
US abstained. But I mean, the Ukrainians were not happy about that. The
Mhm.
Americans were, distancing themselves. And there was a meeting in Kiev also of Western leaders to support Ukraine. And again, the Americans didn't show up.
Mhm.
So I don't think it's that Trump exactly has turned against Ukraine. I think he's just losing interest in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, domestically, he talked a lot about his achievements, like the Dow over 50,000 and the mortgage rate is down, no illegal crossing, those sort of his regular talking points. Well, but he didn't, mention a word about Epstein, right?
No.
So, uh, but what's interesting with this State of Union is he gave a lot of award, medals throughout
Mm.
this speech. Like half of the time, it was part of the reason it was so long is there's a lot of a stand-up ovation and then award giving, those sort of things. The whole thing I feel like is a show now, more than
Yes.
anything else, right?
It is a complete show. And I'm going to say something which I think is going to be controversial and which will probably provoke pushback. I said it on my own program too. It reminded me an awful lot of Biden's State of the
Yeah.
Union
Mhm. Yeah.
addresses,
Mhm.
the incredible amount of self-congratulation, the claim that all is well, that America is back, that we're doing incredibly well, that we're the best, everybody's happy, everybody in America's happy. The incredibly selective and misleading use of statistics, which are thrown around like confetti,
Yeah.
without any real attempt to explain what any of them actually mean. The refusal to discuss um, any actual problems. I mean, we even recognize that there are problems. I mean, this is, by the way, I mean, this is where you listen to Xi Jinping,
Mm-hmm.
and when Xi Jinping speaks, when there's a report done by Xi Jinping to the Central Committee or to the
Mm-hmm.
Parliament, whatever, he would say, look, this is what we've achieved. This is what we need to achieve. This
Mm-hmm.
is where the problems are. This is how we're going to address them. This is the plan. This is how
Mm-hmm.
we're going to formulate. There's nothing like that anymore. I mean, he says, we're doing brilliantly, we're doing amazingly, we're doing fantastically. All is well. I'm the person who's achieved all of these great things. Applaud me. I'm the greatest. And by the way, there's these despicable people on the other side. When it was Biden, he was talking about Trump. Now it's Trump. He's talking about Biden. The Biden and co used to talk about the Republicans.
Uh-huh.
Trump now talks
Mm-hmm.
about the Democrats. But as you rightly say, it's all theatre. It's completely degenerated into theatre. It's also very boring.
Uh-huh. Yeah. 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 Seriously, several times I almost fall asleep. It's true,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I personally think they can get rid of the State of Union altogether. We're
Yeah.
living in the internet age. He could, if he wants to, he could give like a
Yeah.
quarterly update, live stream to the American people
Yeah.
directly,
Yeah.
right? Just tell people, okay, what we have achieved and what am I working on right now and what we will continue to work in the future.
Which is
30
what
minutes, right?
which is absolutely, which is what used to happen, by the way. I mean, it's not widely known, but the State of the Union address is a relatively modern innovation.
Mhm.
I mean, the president does have to provide an annual report to Congress,
Mhm.
but throughout the 19th and early 20th century, it was provided in writing. It's
Okay.
just the same.
Uh-huh. So now they're doing this
Yeah,
theatrical instead.
absolutely. Yeah,
Uh-huh. Yeah. I mean, why don't you use in modern technology, right? You can live stream with the people
quite,
directly, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Um, Also, Democrat has its own rebuttal. I did watch that,
Yeah,
which not many people watch it. So
no,
part of the thing is I always watch the rebuttal, but also this year, it's the uh, governor of Virginia. Okay,
yeah,
so she's Abigail Spanberger.
right.
He won last year in November and won, pretty big. So what I feel like after I listen to her is that the Democrats' problem is that they are just downright stupid. They're
Yeah,
just dumb.
yeah,
You see, her speech, Abigail Spanberger's background is the CIA. She used to work for CIA, and her own talking points are two. One is affordability. The other is she didn't think that the Trump foreign policy is keeping Americans safe. In other words, it's not a good foreign policy. Okay,
yeah,
fine. But she herself, she mentioned one word about Epstein. She said there's a cover up of Epstein. Why
yeah,
didn't she make a big deal out of this Epstein thing? Right?
absolutely.
Right now, in particular, if she has ambition, 2028 ambition, Epstein, I think, is a good topic for her to talk about. In particular, when you're talking about protect American children, American, right? Those sort of thing with her background of the CIA. She just mentioned one word. It seems like almost like she's afraid of talking too much of Epstein.
You are absolutely right. You're completely correct. Again, I worked closely with politicians. I've never been one myself, but my aunt was, and I helped to write one of her speeches.
Hmm.
What you do in a situation like the one we're in today in the United States is you focus as the opposition on those things that worry people most. And the single thing that everybody's talking about, you see this in social media, you see
Hmm.
this in chats, you see this all the time, is Epstein.
Yes.
So you focus on Epstein. You say this is the president who said that he was going to drain the swamp.
Hmm.
And what is he doing? He's protecting the
Yep.
swamp.
Yep.
He's trying to keep all the papers away. We insist, we demand that everything now must come out. And they don't do that. No, they're not, because they're not a real opposition.
Hmm. In particular, this time the Democrat even invited the victims to
Yeah,
come to the State of the Union. So
yeah,
in her case, she has the opportunity to immediately after, talking about this, right? Why,
Yeah.
just pointed out why the
Yeah.
president doesn't talk anything about Epstein. There is no
Correct.
investigation, right?
Correct.
So I just find they always missed opportunity. The Democrats somehow always kind of like it, giving them the best opportunity, they always miss it. They
Yes.
cannot catch it, right?
Absolutely right. I completely agree.
Yeah. One thing I also want to ask you, I feel like in the 70s and the 80s, I feel the US Congress was much more powerful than today's Congress, in particular the Senate. Am I right?
There is absolutely no question. You're completely right. Not only was it much more powerful, but of course it had serious people. I mean, I
Mhm,
remember
mhm,
many of the
mhm.
people at that time. I mean, Tip O'Neill, who was the speaker, I
Uh-huh.
didn't like him.
No.
I thought he was deeply corrupt, but he was certainly a powerful
Mhm,
political figure. Then there were people like Sam Nunn, who was, defense intellectual. There was Ted Kennedy. There
mhm.
was all sorts of people in Congress in those days. Today, you look at absolute non-entities. And if you go back further still, you had people like Fulbright, you had
Yeah. Mhm.
others. I
Yep.
mean,
Mertz.
giants
Mhm.
of American politics
Yeah.
and American life.
Yeah.
There's no one like that today. I mean, a Senate in which someone like Lindsey Graham is considered an important person. It's really, I mean, it's pitiful.
But why is that? Why in the 70s and 80s, why they were people, like that? But nowadays we no longer have them in the Senate.
Because in those days there was real politics. I
Okay.
mean, there were real politicians who were connected to American society, who articulated the concerns of American society. And the Senate itself and the House were actual sounding boards for what American society overall and the American people thought about and were worried about. What we have today is what we've discussed in previous programs, an Epstein class.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
all
Yeah.
part of the same group.
Yeah.
They all work together. They're all in the pockets of lobbyists. They never want to really challenge the status quo,
Hmm.
and they're not politicians in any meaningful sense anymore.
Yeah. In the 70s and 80s, maybe because of the Soviet Union, I don't know. So they are more interested in run the country together,
Yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like.
yes,
Today they fight, but I don't know what they really fight about. They
exactly.
they protect the same people. Um,
Precisely.
yeah, they all very corrupt. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah. Again, I think that the collapse of the Soviet Union is not a good thing for the United States. I don't think
No,
it's.
I remember saying that at the time. I said it would be a disaster for the United
Yeah.
States.
Hmm.
I mean, it was the existence of the Soviet Union that kept America sane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mind
Exactly.
you, I said that. I say that the existence of China
Hmm.
today
Hmm.
is driving the United States mad. So you can see the difference.
Yeah, they lost their mind. Yeah, in
Yeah,
many
yeah,
cases, yes, yeah.
yeah,
So the tariffs ruling, I think almost like immediately after we talked last time, then I saw the tariffs ruling came. So it's kind of
yeah,
interesting. Now, it's not unexpected, right? The ruling is pretty
yeah,
much should be ruled away, but there was still confusing. Like, how are you going to? I mean, they are not saying anything about the money the Trump administration already taken in, right? So it's
yeah.
created lots of confusion. What do we go from here in terms of the tariffs, you think?
Well, this is very interesting because, first of all, the ruling that what Trump was doing was unconstitutional is obviously right.
Hmm.
The incredible thing to me was not that Trump lost in the Supreme Court on this issue. It is that there were still three
Yeah.
judges who
Hmm.
decided to
Yeah.
support him. I mean, trying to understand their reasoning, by the way,
Hmm.
I'm not going to even try to because the Congress, the Constitution, as Roberts, by the way, correctly pointed out, on this issue is as clear as is possible to get.
Hmm.
So the the Supreme Court says this is unconstitutional. It is illegal.
Hmm.
So what happens? No award of compensation, no indication that money that people have been forced to pay, which must run into the tens of billions, they should have repaid.
Hmm.
And the president himself sulks and is angry about it. And it sulks again, by the way, in the State of the Union address. And then he just comes along and he imposes tariffs all over again,
Mhm.
doing the same illegal, unconstitutional thing that he did before, but using another statute
Mhm.
to give himself the authority to do it. Now, once upon a time, and I speak now, as a former lawyer,
Mhm.
I just said that was impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, the obvious and correct thing to do is to go to Congress, say, I have a tariff policy, support me over it.
Mhm. Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's what you're supposed to do, not look around for old laws dated from the 60s or the 30s and say that these give me 150 days when I can impose tariffs, and then at the end of those 150 days, I can reimpose the same tariffs for another 150 days and just go on roll on doing that all the time. I mean, this isn't respect for law. It's just tearing it up, refusing to pay money back to people who've had it taken from them illegally. Isn't respect for law again? It's violation of law. Again, it shows the legal and institutional decline that we
Mhm.
see in the United States.
I find it's interesting that Trump right now is, of course, he's in war with a lot of countries, but even domestically,
Yeah,
he, of course, not happy with the Congress for the Epstein file release thing. And of course, the latest ruling by the court, he's not happy. So he's not happy with the court. And not that long ago, he had this fight with the Federal Reserve as well for
yeah,
interest rate. So
yeah,
he is now with all these institutions,
yes,
like kind of in a war with all of them. He's not happy
yes.
with any of them, right?
No, no.
How can you
But
run
the
a country like that?
you cannot run a country in that way. You see, even the military now are pushing back against him. He wants them to attack Iran,
Mhm.
and they say, "Hold on, Mr. President,
Mhm.
what you're asking for, we might not be able to do." What is very, very dangerous and unique in this situation is that even although all of these institutions are in conflict with him, he still dominates the
Yeah.
political landscape.
Yeah.
He's unpopular.
Mhm.
He's behaving increasingly irrationally. But there doesn't seem to be anybody who's prepared to act in a way that will put this to a stop.
Mhm.
But America doesn't have a government in any serious sense of the word. I mean, that's been obvious for a long time, by the way. It doesn't even have a pretense of a government anymore. It used you could still argue that even though there wasn't a government as such that had policies and had made decisions to implement those policies, at least it had an administration. In other words, that the bureaucracy
Mhm.
functioned, even if not particularly well. But I'm not even sure that that is true anymore.
Mhm.
Actually,
Mhm.
um, so everything is starting to come apart.
Yeah.
That is my sense.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, for example, the Epstein, the Congress passed this law, like
Yeah,
overwhelmingly passed this law, but
yeah,
there's still no investigations,
no,
right, for anybody. So Thomas Massie was so frustrated, he actually named the names on
yes,
the floor.
yes,
But if the Trump DOJ doesn't do anything, there's nothing. It seems like nobody, I mean, nobody can force him. So he's still not going to
exactly.
investigate anybody. The Federal Reserve, he's going to change the Federal Reserve chair in May. So that new chair probably is going to push for whatever Trump wants,
Yes,
right? And the Supreme Court, as you said, even the ruling, he could just define the court immediately with a
yes,
different reason to impose.
yes,
So he still get his way somehow, right?
yes.
Even though there are so many institutions supposed to balance his power, but it's not really balancing his power now.
That's exactly correct. That is
Yeah.
exactly correct. And it's not Donald Trump, the man, who's to blame for this. And I
Hmm.
think this is a key thing to understand. I read every day, all the time about, America's becoming a fascist country. Trump is a would-be dictator, all of those things. It is the failure of the constitutional, institutional system
No.
in the US. It's just not working. It's not functioning anymore. Um, um, it's just unable
Hmm.
to conduct government well. I'll tell you something about 10 months ago. I went on a trip to Georgia. I'm sure you remember it.
Hmm.
And there was a whole group of people there from Tufts University. One of them, by the way, I'm fairly sure was in the CIA or had something to do with the CIA.
Hmm.
Yeah, a lovely man, by the way. I liked him, but I was very, I thought he was up to all kinds of things. And another person who I'm pretty sure was in the military. Anyway, they were all telling me, they were all complaining, this is a government that's chaotic, it's
Hmm.
disorganized, it doesn't work. I said, okay, all right, you are the United States. What are you going to do?
Hmm.
Don't tell me, because I agree with you, don't tell me that you, the United States, are unable to do anything in this situation. I mean,
Hmm.
there's a whole group of them. These are people from Tufts, yes? And they're all there looking at me as if
Hmm.
I'd said something incredible, something bizarre. I, I've never known a time in American history where it was like this.
It's very interesting that the people like the Congress, right? It's not easy to get into the Congress. You have to run a campaign,
No,
do a lot
no,
of stuff in order to get in. And what's the purpose of you going into the Congress? Well, part of your job is to balance the power, right? When the president doesn't do his
yeah,
job, you're supposed
yeah,
to straighten him out. But it seems like once they got into the Congress, that's it. They no
yes,
longer do anything. They're
no,
in the
no.
Congress.
They're in the Congress. The seats, as we know, are heavily gerrymandered. It's very difficult to remove people once they
Mhm.
get into Congress.
Mhm.
Many of them see this as a mechanism to make lots and lots and
Uh-huh.
lots of
Uh-huh.
money.
Yeah.
We've seen some extreme examples of corruption.
Yeah.
There was Senator Menendez, wasn't there,
Oh yeah.
a few months ago? So, I mean, and I suspect he's just an extreme case of this.
Mhm.
And he was a powerful senator in his
Yeah.
own way.
Yeah.
So, there's no sense of honor or duty or obligation, no sense that you are where you are
Mhm.
because you're there to serve and to fulfill a purpose, a higher purpose. There doesn't seem to be any of that anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at Trump's visit. So he claimed he he's going to visit China March 31st.
Mhm.
China still hasn't confirmed that.
No,
So this is a very weird situation, I find. What is going on here?
I've never seen anything more bizarre. I mean, Trump has effectively invited himself to China. I mean, he said a few months ago that he was going to go to China. He's now named the date.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just
that's it.
that's it.
I am.
Yeah,
I'm coming. Okay.
I'm coming. Yeah, it's like the unwanted relative who suddenly turns up at your door. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, it's really very bizarre.
Yeah. Um, yeah, we will see what how this develops.
It goes back. It goes back though to our earlier point about the fact that Trump is very intimidated by
Uh-huh.
China,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and having, as I said, been very badly bruised by China last year, he now is desperate to try and meet Xi Jinping and to get
Uh-huh.
himself back on some kind of equal terms with him.
Okay.
And this is I think what this is all about.
Okay. Very, very strange. I find the whole thing, it's just I can't really
Well,
comprehend.
well, well. Again, I follow Russian affairs, as you know. I mean,
Hmm.
the Putin, the Russians, Putin is also coming to China
Hmm.
uh, this year. But again, the way in which that has been discussed or talked about in Russia is completely different. I mean, they say, yes, he's been invited to China by Xi Jinping. No, we haven't yet sorted out a time.
Yeah.
Yes, there will be discussions about this. Wait for the announcement.
Yes.
This is this is this is how it's supposed to happen. It's
Yeah.
not like it not, but with Trump, all of that goes out of the window, and no one says anything. What they make of this in Beijing, I just can't even begin to think.
Yeah. I think what Russian did is what supposedly
Yeah,
US should do,
exactly,
right? We are
exactly,
discussing the date now, so no more
exactly,
to tell.
exactly.
Instead, he said, 31st for
I
March.
know,
Yeah,
I know,
but very strange.
I know. Inviting yourself to someone else's country, I mean, it's astonishing, actually.
I think even China doesn't know how to deal with somebody like that, right? It's
No,
a, you know, that's not how foreign
no,
policy or
no.
diplomacy.
Well, I think China knows exactly how to deal with it, but I think they're being very, very careful.
Hmm.
I think quite rightly, they don't want to say, well, no, actually, Donald Trump hasn't been invited because
Hmm.
they don't want to make what is already a very bad situation
Hmm.
even worse than it already is. But one thing we can be absolutely certain whenever Donald Trump turns up in China, Xi Jinping, Wang Yi, everybody in the Chinese government will be completely prepared. They will have all the facts at their fingertips. They will be able to tell Trump what they need to tell him. They will certainly not be caught off balance.
Okay. All right. Britain. So Mendelssohn was arrested. We were talking about he wasn't
Yeah,
arrested. So shortly after that, he was arrested, but then he was
yeah.
released. What was that? What was the purpose of the arrest?
Right, now this is extremely interesting, and here I have to be very careful because, of course, I live in Britain, and there
Hmm.
are extremely strict laws governing this. But I'm going to just take our viewers through. So we had
Hmm.
Andrew arrested
Yeah.
last week. We pointed out, if you remember, very strange
Yeah.
that Andrew was arrested and that Mandelson, against whom the case is much stronger, was not arrested. Then Mandelson is arrested. And what we have now learned is that Mandelson was arrested because the police were given what was supposed to be a tip off.
Hmm.
In other words, they were told by a man called Lindsay Hoyle, who is the Speaker, President, if you like, of the House of Commons, the lower
Hmm.
part of the
Hmm.
British Parliament, that Mandelson was about to flee the country and go to the British Virgin Islands. So it looks as if the police were prompted to arrest Mandelson. Now, Lindsay Hoyle is a close personal friend of the Prime Minister, of Keir Starmer. He's helped Keir Starmer in the past. And directly after Mandelson is arrested, Keir Starmer tells the House of Commons, I promise to provide you with all of the papers relating to Mandelson's appointment as British ambassador to the United States. But now I'm not going to provide you with all of those papers because Mandelson has been arrested and there is now a police investigation. So you can add it, you could put it all together.
So, like I said, I still believe nobody will go to jail. I mean,
No,
they will
no,
put up all these shows and
no,
make it sound,
no,
yeah.
no, no.
Like I
I mean,
just.
I'd already, just to say, I'd already suggested in the past on my
Mhm.
own channel that I thought there would probably be some information in those papers, which Mandelson is not going to, if it's a Starmer is not going to show us now, which would have been very damaging politically to Starmer himself. And I've set out in my own channel at some length why I think that. There were things that Starmer's former chief of staff hinted were or in those papers, which I didn't think Starmer would, if they were really there, I didn't think Starmer would be able to survive politically.
Okay. And I just find out that like former Prince Andrew, he even though he's no longer has a title, but he's still eighth in line for the crown.
Yes, Yes.
That's still the case.
Yes, yes, I believe so, and I understand that it would require Parliament to change that because
Okay.
the way in which someone becomes king
Hmm.
is already governed by existing laws, and because he is the son of the former queen, he is in line for the throne if the seven other people ahead of him were all to die.
Hmm. This is so interesting. So despite all these, oh, his title is taken away now,
Yeah.
but he's still, in line for the
Yes.
crown,
Yes.
even though it's
Yes.
unlikely, of course, there's seven people before him, but still, he's still, that doesn't change, the real thing is not changing. Yeah.
No.
And then in Norway, this Torbjørn
Yeah.
Jagland, he tried to commit suicide and now
Yes.
in the hospital. I wonder how much of that is for show, whether he was seriously trying to kill himself.
Or who knows? The thing to always understand about suicides, and this isn't true of every suicide, but of many, many, many suicides of people who find themselves in this position, is that i- i- attempts to commit suicide are often an attempt to gain sympathy.
Yeah, yeah.
Look what they've done to me,
Hmm. Hmm.
basically.
But this guy in particular, whether it's he's serious trying to kill himself or not, I have zero sympathy for him.
No.
He, what's interesting about him is that, the Nobel Peace Prize, they always giving to people to
Yeah.
make China unhappy. And during his time, when he was the chair of Nobel Peace Prize Committee in 2010, he was the chair. So they did award the Nobel Peace Prize to a dissident. They call them dissidents, Liu Xiaobo. So now, well, on the one hand, that they're talking about, democracy, this and that. On the other hand, this guy, the chair, was vacationing with Jeffrey Epstein, a pedophile. This is
Yeah.
2010, which is after Epstein was already convicted in 2008. So I
Yes.
just find that the whole thing is so ironic and so utterly amusing to me. I
Mm.
One thing about this Liu Xiaobo, though, which kind of interesting, is I personally don't think he is a bad guy. He's trying to overthrow the government, the Chinese government or something. He's a little bit like he and his boss, Zhao Ziyang. I think they were a little bit like a Gorbachev. They were
Yeah.
naive. Don't you
Yeah.
think Gorbachev is
Uh,
kind of naive?
well, absolutely. I'm sure you're right. I mean, I don't know much about these people, but I think you're completely correct. I mean, Gorbachev came in, became president of general secretary of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, and I mean, he wanted to carry out all kinds of reforms, which he never really thought through
Mhm.
or prepared, and he assumed that it would be very easy. He would meet the Americans. The Americans would give him, he somehow came to the view that the Americans were good guys,
Mhm. Mhm.
and of course they weren't.
Mhm. Well,
Very naive ultimately.
what does the Russians see him? Do they blame on him or do they blame on Yeltsin for the collapse of the Soviet Union?
Right. They blame both, but they
Okay.
blame Gorbachev more. I mean,
Uh-huh.
Gorbachev is the particularly unpopular man because, of course, it was with Gorbachev that it all started. And when I say blame him, I mean he is massively unpopular in Russia today.
Yeah. I still find it's a
Yeah.
I find it's hard to understand that he didn't force, put firstly, really demanding to put on the paper that NATO, no expansion beyond East
Well,
Germany,
exactly.
right? He
Well,
didn't put
exactly.
it on paper. I find
Well,
that
exactly.
that's very
Well,
hard to
uh,
understand.
absolutely. I mean, basically, I mean, he surrounded himself with people who hated the Soviet Union, and I mean, he was the leader of the Soviet Union, and he consistently chose to put people in high positions who were very pro-American.
Hmm.
And eventually he became pro-American himself. Now, I don't think he ever himself um, faltered in his own personal loyalty
Hmm.
to the Soviet Union,
Hmm.
but he was a very confused man. I remember him well, by the way.
Hmm. Yeah, Gorbachev is well studied, that period of time in China. So there were lots of discussions about how the Soviet collapsed, and
Yeah.
but
It didn't
regard.
need to collapse. It didn't need to collapse, by the way. I mean,
Mhm,
I know enough about the Soviet Union to be able to say. I mean, it had economic problems.
mhm,
It had significant economic problems, but they were not such as they could not have been solved um, by a much more clear-headed and effective government than the one that Gorbachev came up with. I mean, if you look at the kind of challenges that Stalin had to face in the 30s, I mean,
mhm,
they were on a completely different scale. And you could argue also that, in the 60s, the Soviet Union again went in the early 60s through a very rough patch. And at that time, the Soviet leaders of that era, Kosygin, especially, were able to handle things and to bring the and to right the ship. And if you look at China in the 1970s, I mean, it faced a whole set of challenges as well. You know what Deng Xiaoping is said to have said about Gorbachev? You met him. He said this man looks impressive,
mhm,
but you know something, he really isn't that bright. And I think that was exactly right about Gorbachev. He
yeah.
looks he looked
Mhm,
impressive, but beneath the surface, he wasn't really that bright. I mean, what the Chinese government did in the 70s and 80s
mhm,
was, I mean, China was in a much weaker position
mhm,
then than the Soviet Union was.
mhm,
I mean, it should have been China that was faced the problem. The big mistake, can I just say, there's something that I think people in China need to be aware of. There is now a universal consensus. I don't know anybody in Russia who thinks about foreign policy today who would disagree about this. The biggest mistake the Soviet Union made, the source of its crisis in the 1970s, in the problems that
mhm,
accumulated in the 1970s. The biggest mistake the Soviet Union made was to quarrel with China.
mhm,
The
mhm,
quarrel with China was the biggest. I mean, it split the communist movement.
mhm,
It meant that the Soviet Union, instead of confronting the US, was confronting
mhm,
China
mhm,
and the US,
mhm,
which did put a strain on Soviet resources. It made the Russians, it made the Soviet Union drift towards trying to come to some kind of accommodation with the US, which proved to be a complete disaster and led to ultimately produce Gorbachev. Whereas what the Soviets should have done was that they should have, on the contrary, worked to maintain the friendship with China at the high level that it was in the 1950s. And China was an ally that the Soviet Union should never have lost or thrown away. And out of arrogance and vanity and stupidity, they did. Um, have you ever heard of Vyacheslav Molotov?
yeah.
Molotov was a very, very senior Soviet politician. He'd been Stalin's foreign minister.
Mhm,
And at the time, he was in retirement. At the time, he repeatedly made this point. He said that um, we are turning against us our most important ally, and that will destroy us. And he was absolutely right.
I feel like.
And Gorbachev in the
Mhm.
80s, instead of trying to improve relations with the Americans, what he should have done was focus on improving relations with China instead. And China was ready for it.
I feel the Soviets' mistake, certainly after Stalin, was they trying to dominate China. They were kind of like
Yeah,
become an imperialist power themselves.
yeah,
And
that is exactly correct. They became arrogant,
uh-huh,
and they thought that they could treat China
yeah.
like as if China was Romania or something like that, which I mean, which it wasn't. I mean,
Mhm,
that they were the big brother,
mhm,
and China was the little brother, which is ridiculous. Now Stalin, who was many things, but he was also a great man. Now
mhm,
he had very very great interest in China, and knew China very well, and he had two meetings with Mao, by the
mhm,
way. Um, and he thought about China in a profoundly different way. But to say it straightforwardly, Stalin was a far more intelligent, far better educated man than the Soviet leaders who succeeded him.
mhm. Yeah, but almost like the same mistake the US is making now,
Yeah,
continue to disrespectful of China's sovereignty,
yeah,
independency, those sort of things, still want to
yes,
dominate China. They still
yes,
believe they can. I feel
yes.
like some people still think that way.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
To me, by the way, with some knowledge that I have of China and its history, I mean, that seems incredible
Mhm,
that people would ever think that. But remember that the Soviets and the Russians are Europeans,
mhm, mhm, mhm.
just as ultimately the Americans are an offshoot of
Yeah.
Europe. So they have that racial, cultural arrogance that, leads to that kind of disaster. Over the last few years, uh, there's been a big sea change in Russia about this,
Mhm.
and they say, no, we're not Europeans, we're Eurasians. So let's put all that behind us. We look at Eurasia, we see what all of these other countries have changed, but they've only, and to say this straightforwardly, they've only come to that conclusion
Mhm.
because everything else was a disaster before.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why, being an imperialist power is not a good thing. It's
No,
not a
no,
benefit. I mean, look at Britain, look at the US. I think fundamentally you always want to
yeah,
be this empire. It's in particular
yes,
today's world, I think it's self-defeating to believe that.
it it
Yeah.
is absolutely, it has always been self-defeating,
Hmm.
and China has never been that.
Hmm.
We've discussed already, and I want to reiterate again, the West uses wrong labels to refer to Chinese things.
Yeah.
The Huangdi was never
Hmm.
an emperor.
No. Hmm.
And China was never the Chinese empire, as it is often still written about.
Yeah.
There's never been a time when the Chinese thought of their country in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's hard to change these people's mind. They seems
No,
very stubborn to believe that the empire is a good thing, and yeah, they want
yes,
to preserve the empire at any cost, and yeah, that's
yes.
that's what's going on. Yeah. Um, now what you just said was that the U.S. lost interest of Ukraine. So what is the Europeans' plan now moving forward? So the latest one, the EU countries are now very furious at Hungary because they have a plan to sanction Russia, and Hungary now
Mm,
blocked that, and
yeah.
then the loan to Ukraine. What's moving forward? The EU's plan is?
Well, the EU's plan with Hungary is to engineer the removal of Prime Minister Orban by throwing everything they have to support the opposition in the
Mhm.
Hungarian elections, which are coming up in April, and they might succeed, by the way. So, I mean, let's not assume that that's going to fail. But in all other respects, the European plan doesn't exist. There isn't one. It's to tell each other that all is well, that Ukraine is winning the war, that it is resilient,
Mhm.
that it will keep on fighting even without the Americans, that all we need to do is get them a little bit more economic aid. And all we need to do also is to create more harassment of Russian oil exports, and somehow all will turn out right. That is the European plan. In other words, they don't have one.
Okay. Mertz is visiting China right now. So once he arrived at the airport, he made a speech, a very quick speech. He said that decouple from China is a mistake. Is that just the German idea, or do they Europeans in general start to see that as a mistake? Do you think?
No, they don't see this as a mistake. And
Okay.
of course, what Mertz is saying, and remember, he's saying this on a trip to China. What he's saying is that he's got a major economic crisis in Germany,
Okay.
Companies are closing down. Everything is in a very, very bad situation. And the reason the German economy a few years ago was strong was because, of course, it got cheap gas from Russia,
Hmm.
but because also it had very, very good economic relations with China. So German business people have come along and said to Mertz, for heaven's sake, please go to China, talk to the Chinese, tell them, you know, that we want to come back and we want good relations with them again, because otherwise this economic crisis will deepen and it will take you down with it. So that's why Merz has come to China, and that's why he's talking in the way that he's talking. But he doesn't really believe it himself. I've been following Merz very, very closely.
Hmm.
And he is incapable of thinking in these ways. He's as racially and culturally arrogant as it gets, by the way.
The Europeans still like to talk about values. They always want to say we want to work with the countries that share our values. What exactly is the value they talking about, right? From what I see, this is what happened like for the past year. They supported a genocide in Gaza. Okay, I
Yeah,
mean there is no other way to say it. They supported that until they really couldn't, so they gave a little bit of speech and here and there. But in reality, they were supporting a genocide. And
yeah,
then they watched the U.S., their alliance, the head of their alliance is the U.S. is kidnapping a independent country, a sovereign country's
yeah.
president, Maduro, right, in Venezuela. And now this whole Epstein class, Epstein file thing just exposed them one after another, being a creep, but being, horrible, horrible, doing horrible things. Are these the things they're talking about as value? What is the European value?
Well, well, there are, I mean, the European values are whatever the Europeans decide on any particular day. So, I mean, see, kidnapping a president is bad unless we do it when it's good. Committing a genocide is wrong. At least if we say it's happening in Xinjiang region, we don't need to worry too much about the facts because, we're just as our values are endlessly changeable. So are the facts, whatever we choose them to be at any particular time. But when we have an actual genocide on our doorstep, well, then it's not a genocide at all. And we call it a legitimate self defense by an ally that looks like us. So there are no European values. I think that's the key thing to understand. I think over the last 5 years, uh, this has now become absolutely clear. Um, the talk about values is simply a way for the Europeans to rationalize this extraordinary sense of superiority
Yeah,
they feel they have over other people.
yeah. Yeah, it's a kind of like a coded word, right? Rather than,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
One interesting thing about the chips, for example, so the latest one, like H200, remember it was such a big dispute. So Trump now finally agreed, okay, NVIDIA can sell H200, but so far they hasn't sold any H200 to China. So, and I find that they are a little bit angry about this, right? That how dare you, China, not taking, our chips or something. It's So now they claim that China, like a DeepSeek, is training their next model using Blackwell, which is more advanced chips. But Blackwell is banned to sell to China. But they claim that somehow China get onto Blackwell, and DeepSeek is using that to train its models. To me, the it's to me like the U.S. is almost running out of options in terms of competing with China in the high tech
Yeah.
area. So they just make up stories along the way. Is that what they're doing
Yeah, I
now?
think you're exactly right. This is exactly what this is. I mean, uh, I was reading in the Financial Times just a few weeks ago that China has launched its first prototype lithography
Hmm.
machine
Hmm.
that is able to produce the highest end chips.
Yeah.
I mean, anything that Taiwan can do,
Hmm.
China is still going to be able to do. So, why should the Chinese be running around getting inferior chips
Hmm.
that American industry produces when they can make better chips themselves? Anybody who thinks that China cannot make the most advanced chips is utterly deluded or a fool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as that.
you just look at the attack on the Chinese tech firms, right? So we talked
Yeah,
about last time Hollywood, they are
yeah,
blaming ByteDance for Dance 2, even though Dance 2 itself doesn't use any of the copyrights violation,
yeah,
violated characters or anything. It's just a platform, right? It's a tool.
correct.
But they are going after ByteDance. And after that, and now recently, Anthropic is blaming, accusing Chinese companies for using somehow Anthropic's saying to train their own model. So they just throw out one after another kind of attack on the Chinese tech
Yeah,
companies.
it has the quality of paranoia about it.
Uh-huh.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, it is impossible that these people can do this themselves.
Mm-hmm.
How can they?
Yeah.
We are superior to them. They can't possibly be as good as us. I mean, so there must be some sinister, wicked thing that these bad, inferior people are doing to get this from us or that from us or something else. As it's both paranoid and it's becoming hysterical as well. So because these people are bad and because they're here to take whatever we've got, we must close down their social media companies. We
Mm-hmm.
must forbid their AI applications, which are of course better than our own, which
Mm-hmm.
is in itself wicked and wrong in some ways. As I said, there's something deeply hysterical
Mm-hmm.
about it.
Yeah. Well, the last thing, the Olympics is talking about hysterical. So there is a athlete. So her name is Eileen Gu. Okay. So
Mm.
her mother is Chinese and she's representing the Chinese to compete in the Olympics. For US athlete or any country's athlete to representing another country, that's a very, very common thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah,
But here you have Elaine Gu doing that, and the from the vice president to Scott Bessent, they were all commenting on this like she's doing something awful. But this is common thing among athletes to
yeah,
do all the time, isn't
yeah,
it?
absolutely, completely, of course. I mean, bullying a young woman.
Yeah, yeah. And even like there's another woman, Zoe Atkin, who is competing with Elaine Gu in the same category, the free skiing category. Zoe Atkin, got a bronze. She's also American, but she's representing Britain. So,
Yeah, yeah. You see, what would have been praised if it was a person of Chinese ancestry who'd chosen to compete for the
uh-huh.
US
Yeah, yeah,
is now seen as somehow disloyal and treasonous
yeah,
when it's done by a person with Chinese ancestry representing their own country in preference to the option to do it presumably for the United States. It's again, it is hysterical,
yeah, yeah,
as you rightly said, I mean, it's something that goes on all the time.
yeah.
There's nothing unusual
Hmm.
about it.
Hmm.
It's a question of individual choice.
Yeah.
And Americans always tell us that they're all about individual choice. So,
Yeah, even Vance, when he was asked about this, he said, "Oh, our country, we have a freedom and liberty." I was like, "But you don't like the fact that she made her own
no.
choice?"
Well,
So yeah, it's unusual in the fact that like J.D. Vance, who is the vice president, right, and Bessent, these people are talking about
I
this.
know.
Normally, nobody pay attention to these things.
Of course not. Of
Yeah,
course. And nor should they.
yeah, but they're just very, very insecure. I think the United States right now is very insecure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. I think there's also a growing sense that the American economy is becoming very unstable,
Mm-hmm.
that the stock market boom peaked at some point at the end of last year,
Okay.
that things are looking very
Mm-hmm.
unsteady, which is often the sign of a plunge. And that I think that's making people very nervous, especially as they could see, and I'm going to say it, China going from strength to strength,
Mm-hmm.
economy continuing to uh, build, um, trade surplus continuing to grow, more and more countries wanting to do deals with China, a sense that China is, in spite of everything that's been attempted, it's increasingly looking like it's the winner. And
Mm-hmm.
the winner in a race which America insists on running against China. The Chinese have said that's not what we're
Yeah.
about. We're here to be partners. We're here to hold hands with you, not to fight you or to race against you. But that is not something Americans can ever understand.
Well, Trump was talking about this 50,000 at the Dow. Okay. He made it such a big deal.
Yeah,
Well, on Monday, the Dow dropped to 800 in a day. Okay.
yeah,
So he
yeah.
didn't say a word about that. So,
No, it has all of the signs.
mm,
I'm not a market person,
mhm,
but it's got all of the signs of a market that is beginning to become unstable,
yeah.
and where the players are beginning to become very nervous.
Hmm.
So the if things look like there's going to be a sell-off, everybody rushes to sell, but they say to themselves, maybe this isn't the moment, and if I sell now, I'm going to lose out. So that they immediately go back in when there's
Hmm. Hmm.
good news. You usually get a period
Hmm.
of about a year or a bit more or a bit less when that happens at the top of a bubble.
Yep. Yep. Let's see. Okay.
Mm.
Okay. Let's talk next Wednesday again. Thank you
Indeed,
so much.
indeed.
Thank
Okay,
you.
right.
Bye.
Bye.